All right, thanks everyone. Welcome to our final session of the afternoon. Our, roundtable discussion, though we're still set up as a panel, on the futures of work, partnership, and the role of evidence. I am Alison Fahey. I'm the Director of Policy and Communications at JPAL Global here at MIT. Excuse me. I've been with JPAL for nearly a decade, and I've worked across a whole bunch of different areas. And what I really love about being here and talking about kind of the work related to the future of work and labor in firms is how much it pulls together so much of what we're focused on. It is, of course, our firm's work. It's also labor, it's also climate change, it's gender, it's access to finance. And so I'm very excited about this conversation today because I think my fellow kind of panelists here have perspectives on a whole host of these different issues and how they connect. So I'm very excited to jump in. For the discussion, we will aim to take stock of what we've learned today and to try to shed some light on partnership opportunities and collaboration ideas that are coming out from the sessions that we've been hearing since this morning. So for this discussion, I'd like to welcome our panelists. We have to my left, Jennifer Hansel, a Senior Program Officer in the Global Policy and Advocacy team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Katrina Gordon, a Senior Manager at Humanity United. And Rafael Albañil, the Manager of Education and Employment at Fundación Corona. Welcome, and thanks very much to all of you for being with us. So, welcome to the panelists, thanks. So I've really enjoyed our program today and found that it raised a lot of interesting and kind of thought-provoking moments. And so I'd like to start and kind of kickstart our discussion by hearing from you about what you thought was interesting, what was thought-provoking, and how it links to some of the work that you're doing in your organizations. And so I'll start by asking you all two sort of lengthy questions. So I'll lay them out first. So first, we would love to hear what your organization's key priorities are related to economic empowerment of women and other vulnerable groups, and your organization's priorities related to skills and workforce development in the changing kind of global context of work. And then second, getting at less what your organizations do and more your perspective coming from today, what's really struck you from today in terms of what's been shared? Any myths maybe you or you think the field might have been carrying that have been a little bit busted or overturned today? Or new realities on the ground that you've learned about? And how you are thinking about the future of work as it relates to the majority of the world's working people and LMICs, a key learning that you want to take home and bring back into your organizations. So in short, we'd really love to hear about your priorities with respect to today's themes and your reflections on today. So Jennifer, we'll start with you.
Sure, well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel and also for hosting us here and for the work that all of you are doing regarding women's economic empowerment. Perhaps you saw on October 5th in The Economist, there's an op-ed by Melinda Gates. And in this op-ed, she laid out the three key policies or priorities that we have been focusing on or aim to focus even more on regarding how to increase women's economic power. When we say women's economic power, it really is the work that we're doing across the entire foundation, across all of our teams and different strategies. And the three areas that we see as smart investments to increase women's economic empowerment. First is safe, inclusive, and interoperable digital public infrastructure. And as more LMICs are starting to do more DPI, we want to make sure that it's designed to benefit women. Particularly when it comes to you need an ID to really exist in the economy. So there's a tremendous amount of potential regarding DPI. The second area is access to affordable capital to support enterprises. The World Bank notes that there's a $1.7 trillion financing gap for women enterprises. And in emerging markets, the loan rates are astonishingly high, from 30 to 100%. So we're working to reduce the cost of capital for low-income women to ensure that more capital flows to them. We also are working to reduce the gender bias in financial institutions to increase women's entrepreneurs' access to the financial products, markets, and training to close the financing gap. The third area is to remove barriers that constrain women's productivity. And we're going to do this through 3 areas, or we are doing it. One is through country-led agricultural transformation, with policies and innovations that benefit small-scale producers, increase women's economic power, and improve nutrition. And this also links to climate finance and ensuring that women are both at the table in these discussions and that finance actually reaches women farmers. The second area regarding productivity is investing in women's health and family planning, and ensuring also that the healthcare workforce is skilled and equitably delivers, innovative and high-quality care, and also focused on reducing maternal and newborn mortality. And then finally, we are looking at care and really care infrastructure, and starting with childcare. And we're doing that through three ways. One is through governments. So when you look at the example, say, with Canada or with Mexico or Uruguay, how are we governments really prioritizing and coming up with government publicly funded childcare solutions? How are employers, both private sector and the public sector, coming up with models, including, say, family leave policies, health leave policies, and then we're also investing in innovative models and testing childcare models in Kenya, India, and Bangladesh. I don't want to go too long. And our Women's Economic Empowerment Strategy, which is one of the many strategies that the Foundation has, is a core component of our women's economic power work across the entire Foundation. And the overall goal, and this was passed in September 2022, is when the strategy was approved. Our overall goal is to create opportunities for 80 million women to increase their incomes by 2030. We're working in 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Our deep dives countries are Kenya and India, with our exploratory countries in Nigeria, Uganda, Ethiopia, Senegal, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And we are focusing on 5 levers that I might get into a little deeper, pending the questions, which are capital, sex-disaggregated data, digital tools, access to markets, and care. So you can kind of see the overlap or how that feeds into the WEP work, which is foundation-wide. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Katrina. Sorry, Katrina, we'll turn to you next.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for having me here. I work at Humanity United, which is part of the Omidyar group. Humanity United is part of the philanthropic interests of Pierre and Pam Omidyar, one of the former eBay owners. And we've been working for about 12 years in the space of both peace building and then forced labor and human trafficking. And I personally work on that forced labor, human trafficking side, but focus on global supply chains. So I think that's why I ended up here. So at the Foundation, our guiding star is really transformed labor systems that are safe and fair for the most marginalized workers. And through our strategy process this year, we actually shifted. We used to say vulnerable workers, but we've shifted to marginalized to reflect our understanding that groups aren't inherently vulnerable, but are rather actively marginalized within our systems. So that language really resonated with our partners, and especially in recognizing migrant workers as marginalized. And so we focus on engaging a variety of different stakeholders, really believing that workers, civil society, companies, investors, and policymakers alike play a leading role in reducing power imbalances and changing conditions that enable forced labor. So in working with these different kinds of stakeholders, we have 3 main focuses. They are worker power, corporate accountability, and safer labor migration. And I can share a little bit about each of these. So on the worker power side, we've supported a lot of migrant worker networks. Shramik Sanjal in the Nepal to Qatar corridor, Fisher people in Thailand, and we've seen that these kinds of networks have led to stronger protections for workers. And while scaling of these worker organizing efforts is key, we've also learned that we need to be more inclusive of the diversity of workers that are in these situations of forced labor. So to actually answer your question, we've learned that these networks don't include women. There are different castes and even more transient workers that don't fall into that migrant worker category that our strategy has been leaving out. So it's something that we're really shifting this year to do better on. On the corporate accountability side, we've seen the spread of mandatory human rights, environmental due diligence, and that draft legislation really could have significant impact in holding corporates accountable. And we've seen, especially in the US, import bans have also rapidly increased in dollar value. And this relates to my work, which is on having good quality data. These pieces of legislation rely on data to be able to do that corporate accountability work and either stop shipments or seek other kinds of remediation. And so my pet set of projects are all related to creating more publicly available data sets that can be used by NGOs, governments, academics, or even brands themselves. And then the third piece is around safer labor migration. And this is, for us, this year our priority is really around the full experience of migrant workers. So making sure that to be more worker-centric, we're thinking about pre-departure, on the job, post-job, really all these different phases that a migrant worker experiences. And this relates to the thing that I noticed today, which was validating. One of our partners is BRAC in Bangladesh, and they developed, it's a very long name, but essentially BPL is an agency that supports migrant workers through the whole process of pre-departure training, developing hard skills and soft skills, and then being placed in a job abroad through government connection for the visas. And one of the big things that we worked on with them was to have soft skills. And it was validating to hear that the hard skills, what gets you the job, and the soft skills, what helps you keep it. So that was, it was like, okay, we did good with that one.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me as well here. Let me tell you something about Fundación Corona. We are a 60 years old philanthropic foundation, funded and led by the Echavarria family. That is a family that have a very important participation in the construction sector in Colombia through the industry called, as well as the Fundación, is Corona. And the foundation right now is focused on promote social mobility through two main areas: citizenship participation and education and employment. In both, we are working from a systemic change point of view that's trying to collaborate with transformations of the mindsets, resources, practices, and relationships. And specifically in education and employment, we're focused on inclusive employment through a model that has this name, inclusive employment model. And we try to understand how we can collaborate to the ecosystem through 4 fronts. First of all, knowledge, but tools as well. And when a tool works, how to scale up those tools. But at the same time, we try to influence private and public players. So our main priorities in knowledge, we think, is still delivering data and analysis about inclusive employment. This will keep the awareness in the ecosystem because we are usually worried about employment, but not necessarily about the populations that have more difficulties to get in the path between education and employment. In Colombia, especially youth, women, and migrants, but as well people with disabilities and ethnic groups, for example. So delivering data and analysis is very important to keep the ecosystem aware and intelligent about which are the main challenges. Right now, we are asking about what will happen with green jobs. We have been listening about green jobs in different conversations. And in the past, as Danielle mentioned this morning, we have learned something about digital sector, and I think is the moment to understand much more about green jobs. In the tools front, we have a wide range of tools. Some of them are very specific to use in the schools. And we are very worried about learning recovery programs, especially after pandemic, but as well about innovative finance mechanisms. And that will be important as well for scaling up, because we understand that social finance is really important to engage private sector into this scaling up the tools that works, as well as results-based funding to engage public sector as well. And I will say for our last front of action, that is influence in Colombia, will be a very important moment. Actually, in 1 week, we are having elections for the local governments. So we will try to work with the new governments in Colombia, trying to influence the policies that will guide main cities or provinces, like for us is departments. That will be very important because they have responsibilities that even the national government doesn't. So those will be our priorities. And about key learnings, I think, wow, it was shocking how much noise is there about artificial intelligence, but how few understandings we have about it.
Excellent. Great. I'll ask a few follow-ups, and I think I'll go in reverse order for these. So Rafael, something that you'd mentioned, I think, is thinking about kind of different segments of marginalized populations. You mentioned youth, women, migrants, ethnic communities, people with disabilities. Can you talk a little bit about how the Foundation's programming thinks about the need to tailor programming in different ways for those different communities? Like, I think this is something that is not terribly surprising, but does emerge from a lot of the research that programs do need to be tailored for suitable populations, or tailored in different ways depending on the population you're trying to reach. So what are you learning, what are you doing, and what do you do differently from an education for employment perspective, depending upon who you're working with?
Well, I think we are learning a lot about youth, and this is with the help of the Aspen Institute, starting for a model that it was mentioned in the morning, GOYN, that is a Global Opportunity Youth Network, is focused on youth that have had difficulties to study or have unemployment. And this model is already implemented in around 10 cities in the world, in Latin America, Africa, and India. And the model shows how to have partnerships through a collective impact model. And this is very important because we are not talking about specific projects, but a long-term view to change the key factors that will help youth to have the opportunities they hadn't in the past. So there are many different kind of partnerships, but in GOYN Bogotá at the beginning, now we are working in GOYN Barranquilla. We have understood how collective impact works and how we can use some innovative finance mechanisms.
Great, okay. So Katrina, next turning to you. So you, I think, laid out, if I captured them, 3 really interesting approaches to thinking about supply chain dynamics in the work that you're doing. This was, an interesting topic from earlier today, thinking about the role and the impact of, larger firms on supply chains or on the supply chains that affect, nano firms. It's great to hear about the 3 things that you're working on right now and that you're excited about and think that they might be effective approaches. Can you also share with us, like, what do you see on the horizon as interesting new areas that an organization like yours should be getting involved in the supply chain space?
Yeah. So I can share about an organization as an example called Open Supply Hub, and it kind of ties together all three areas. Open Supply Hub essentially gives an ID code to every factory in the world. So often, if, say, I'm Gap and I'm working with a sweater manufacturer, that sweater manufacturer may have 10 different names for its facility, which can be a bit of a nightmare if you're trying to manage your hundreds of suppliers. So to be able to have a public data set that has ID codes for all these different factories, it's actually quite useful to brands. Suppliers also like it because they can be more easily found. It's hard with addresses and phone numbers. Again, so much information, especially in more developing markets. And then an area that we're really excited about and have funded projects on is to be able to use these data sets to let workers use these data sets. And so in the case with a few different unions, they were able to work directly with their workers who had been exploited in different ways, and then use the data set to see which factories were associated with which brands, and then seek remediation from the brands. This is something that workers couldn't do before. They didn't know where what they were producing was going. And so something that's kind of innocuous, just a list of ID numbers, can be used and be really powerful for workers. And so for me, as we support different kinds of software and tech tools, some of the really important tenets in those engagements is around responsible data usage. We want to make sure that we're not supporting the development of something that's going to cause harm and bring too much transparency to personally identifiable information for workers, and actually create situations where they're being targeted. So that's something we really try to focus on as we look at different kinds of technology. And then something that I've been really excited about and curious to see how it can take shape is to not only have workers producing data and understanding how it's being used, to also be able to use it themselves, but then to get paid for it. So there's some really interesting participatory data schemes. You may have come across one in the UK that's related to Uber drivers, where they know they're producing this data, they want to get paid for it, and so there's some licensing schemes that are popping up, and I think that can be extended. There's an organization called Blue Number that has a project called Million Makers, where they're actually getting workers in factories that are filling out grievance-style surveys. They're getting paid for doing those. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to just make sure that the worker is at the center of all of these different things that big brands are doing.
Great, okay. Yeah. Thanks. So finally, Jennifer, we'll come back to you. So you'd mentioned the goal of the Women's Economic Empowerment Strategy is to increase incomes for 80 million women over the next period of years, and you're working through these 5 levers. So I wonder if you could share a little bit more about what those 5 levers are, and because I anticipate from kind of a JPAL perspective that some of these might be places where there already is evidence in kind of the public good that is the global rigorous evidence base. I would love to hear from you, do you have a sense that within the foundation and with the broader partners that you're working with in implementing organizations or governments, that there's an appetite for using it? And whether there is or there's scope to do more, what more could we as institutions like JPAL and the Global Business Labs be doing to try to get evidence into those kind of strategy implementation?
Sure, thanks for that question. So first of all, I'll kind of start with your second question.
So go for it, yeah.
With yes, there is a huge appetite for high quality data. As my colleague mentioned, the importance of data to shift decision makers' minds. And so one of the big push or things we're trying to achieve is to really influence the financial and economic system to work better for women. In order to do that, we need to reach the financial and economic decision makers. And so the way that we convince them then is through data, but we also know data alone is not sufficient. Emotions and other things will make people change their minds. So yes, there's a huge appetite for that data, and I think having it in digestible ways, such as policy briefs, linking these large academic papers in a digestible way, so that we can take that to the ministers of finance, we can take it to the central bank governors, and we can emphasize, what's working and why and where, so that people within their own countries can decide what might work best for them. So to dive in a little bit deeper into the 5 levers that we're focused on in the women's economic empowerment strategy, the first one I'll talk about is data. And so I am just coming from the ICLS, the 21st International Conference on Labor Statisticians, where it was really fantastic to see how they are, and Rico was there, defining the standards for informality as well as the care. So unless we have global standards where we can compare data, it makes it hard for us to make the case. It also makes it hard to have solid information on what's working or what's not. So we're working on measuring care in labor force surveys, and informality as well. So when you think about a lot of the presenters that came up when you're talking about the nano or any of the informal sector, a large part of those economies are informal, but those aren't being captured in GDP, or we're only looking at the formal sector. And so how do we do a better job of measuring the people that we are trying to help? And also the use of the data. So, colleagues that I work very closely with on the WE team, the Women's Economic Empowerment team, are doing a great job working with JPAL and others on collecting the data. And then the role that I come in on the division I'm in is how do we use that data to influence policy? How do we get this in front of the people that are making those decisions and make sure that it is being translated into sort of those policy decisions, also in private sector decisions with CFOs and CEOs of multinationals and others. The other area regarding capital, so we're working on the supply side, where we're trying to get the financial products to be more tailored to women. So trying to ensure that the products that are developed are appropriate, and there was some interesting research that came up on whether the flexibility on repayment rates or what is really working regarding that, and I think all that information is very helpful to figure out how do we best do that. And it's also changing the behavior of those financial institutions to see women as a core segment of their business model, client segment. And so that, say, if a guarantee or different ways to reduce the cost of capital are being used to reduce that risk, when that guarantee ends, they will continue to offer this product because they see it as beneficial to their bottom line. And so always making that link back and really emphasizing that this is sort of looking at the long-term systemic changes of the behavior of these organizations. In addition, on the demand side, we're looking at digital inclusion. So, we talked about if you give a cash transfer via a digital avenue, say mobile money, versus cash, that you increase the power of women's and agency and autonomy when it's digitized. And so digital inclusion is important, financial literacy, and also building trust when it comes to digital areas. An example of sort of innovative work that we've been doing was the National Rural Livelihoods Mission. And so we've seen, it brings together, just to kind of quote this, 90 million women organized in 9 million self-help groups, leveraging $65 billion in credit from public and private sector. And so just as an example of how do you take something to scale through aggregation, whether that's influencing an industry at a time, or whether that's through self-help groups that are then aggregated through clusters and federations. In digital tools, what we're focused on is really smartphones. And GSMA data from 2022, there's over 400 million in LMICs, that don't own mobile phones, and women are 41% less likely than men to be using that phone, getting on the internet. And so we're trying to close the gap, both in access to phones, but also use of phones. So how do you make that phone more affordable? And then also, do they have the digital literacy to use that phone for, say, financial transactions? Regarding The markets, and one of the colleagues had mentioned, sort of looking at online and mobile job search platforms, and really women often have less networks when it comes to looking for jobs. They're less plugged in. So jobs that would maybe be through word of mouth or referrals, if we can do that virtually and online, as long as you get over the social norms barriers of women, it's okay for women to be on the internet and sort of the safety factors around that. We are exploring sort of how these mobile job platforms work best. Regarding the care lever, just want to emphasize sort of a few stats on that, if I can pull it up. In LMICs, 80% of preschool-age children need childcare and don't have access. 606 million women of working age were unavailable for employment due to childcare responsibilities, compared to 41 million men. And women spend in most countries, 30 hours a week exclusively on childcare, which is equivalent to an entire second job, basically. And so the problem is huge, and it is a tremendous barrier to keeping women out of the labor force. So when we're looking at some of the solutions to that, one of the things I'd like to flag is we launched with the ILO a care policy portal, an investment simulator to calculate the return on investment of care policies. It's the largest public online care policy modeling tool with data from over 80 countries and more than 180 statistical indicators. And so we're trying to say, how do we take this data and use it? And we also, with the ILO, we want to make sure that we're standardizing what we mean when we say the care economy or care infrastructure.
Great, okay. All right, so I'll shift to, I think, a final question before we open up for Q&A. So first, would love to hear, or maybe I'll make this a little bit of a combined question for some of you. As you walk away from today, ideas that each of you are excited about in terms of like kind of evidence-based partnerships, maybe with people that you've met in the room today, or things that you're launching with partners, within your organizations. And then specifically for those of you who are coming from philanthropy, it would be great to hear just a couple of brief reflections from you, since we only have about 5 minutes, on kind of the specific role that philanthropies have to play and impact investors have to play in social finance, and what they can do to be kind of bridging gaps in investment into the kinds of themes that we're talking about today. So feel free to take your pick on evidence, philanthropy, and impact investing, or a little bit of both. And maybe again, we can start with Rafael.
Okay, great. I think we are excited about the work we are doing in these innovative finance mechanisms. We are right now implementing or proving 4 different kind of mechanisms. We hope to have next year a second phase of a very important program for us, that is social impact bonds, that started in Colombia around 6 years ago. Colombia was the first middle-income country that implemented social impact bonds, and we have had a very important learning that we want to share with other Latin American countries. This was a partnership between IDV Lab, Swiss Economic Cooperation, and Fundación Corona, trying to create and build a market and ecosystem that is mature enough to take the first phase that was focused on employment to another new phase that will be focused on other sectors and maybe other countries, especially Peru. But we have heard a lot of interest in Uruguay, Argentina, El Salvador, and this is because the power of especially results-based funding to align incentives in the ecosystem and deliver better results. Other mechanism we are exploring is the income share agreements through a fund that we called Digital Evolution Fund, and this combines as well income share agreements and paying by results in order to reduce the risk at the end in the payback through a model that will be designed for students to pay easily after they study when they get a job. The other one is try to escalate and prove maybe in other sector an outcome-based fund that we started in the digital sector. Daniel mentioned this morning that we started in Bogota, but we expect to have other cohorts in Cali and Barranquilla. And this is in the digital sector, but as we are asking about green jobs, maybe we want to have a fund, a result-based fund in green jobs, maybe. And the last one of the mechanisms we are exploring is an alliance in which we participate different foundations like Fundación Corona, Bolívar da Vivienda, Santo Domingo, Saldarriaga Concha, and Ford Foundation, trying to deliver tailored financing to transforming ideas that will not find funding by any other way. So we try to this innovative mechanism, and it has been very successful. In the last time we asked for proposals, we had 800 proposals, and it was more over our expectations.
Great, thanks. So yeah, very similar. We try to fund things that won't get funded any other way. And what kind of evolved as part of that effort was, I guess, was it about 5 years ago, Humana United incubated an impact investing fund, and it was focused on supply chain tools that were bringing more transparency, lots of blockchain for traceability, machine learning platforms, kind of the cool stuff that brands like to tout that they're trying and using to gain more awareness of what's going on in their supply chains. And as this fund started, they realized that most of these tools were very early stage. There aren't many investable companies that exist in the space of labor rights. So as part of an effort to develop pipeline for this fund, we worked with the Department of International Development within the UK government, who gave Humanity United about $3.5 million pound grant to incubate and support really early stage companies so that they could become investable by the fund. And through that, we worked with 20 different companies, and kind of an example of the kind of thing we would fund would be, there's a company called Altana AI. It's this really neat federated data AI platform that essentially is able to pile on lots of different data sets and map your supply chain or identify different risks. And so they had been doing this for a while and helping businesses understand what's going on in their supply chains, but they had never included labor rights data. And so we helped to get them access to labor rights data, so that way they could say, not just what was being made, where it was going, but how it was being made, and if there was a risk of a shipment being made with forced labor. And so to be able to propose a human rights use case as a philanthropy to a very much for-profit company is, I think, one of the powers of philanthropic dollars. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's sort of two answers I'd like to say. One, I think that the exciting part of philanthropic dollars is to be able to invest in startups or really good ideas, or areas where it might be a lot harder to get capital, especially, I'd say, women-owned businesses regarding some of those areas. And recently, we've been doing that also in digital examples, sort of apps and whatnot, and a variety of different ways in which we do that. But I think the sort of bigger role is, how do we use our dollars to have systemic changes? And so if we are looking at sort of social finance as a definition of, we are trying to increase the bottom line and economic growth while also contributing to a positive social benefit and environmental benefit, I think that is what all of our investing should be doing. And so coming from the economic growth space, having a market facilitation approach, that when we are working in economic systems, we're facilitating a system that's going to ultimately benefit women better. So if we're working with financial institutions, yes, we can provide capital to de-risk, losses so that the banks will want to lend to women if they are not lending to women, and then hopefully we'll continue to do that. But ultimately, we want to have the systemic change and measure that change. And I think one thing I kind of walking away and kind of going back to your first question, that I didn't really answer on the first one, was with Esther Duflo when she was saying, companies should do their job in whatever line of work they're doing, while realizing your bottom line is going to increase whenever you also have more gender balance, or we reduce, whether it's bullying or sexual harassment or some of the areas that we have equal pay, things that we are trying to improve upon. We want to see the economic benefit for that. And so I think the role in philanthropy is trying to shift, use our dollars to shift systemic economic and financial systems to work better for women and everyone.
Thank you all very much for those perspectives. I think just a kind of remark on some of the pieces that came out there and some of the consistency and what some of you shared. I think I very much agree with the idea that the role of philanthropy is to identify these sort of risky new ideas that are worth exploring and also working on systemic change, and in particular in the kind of risky and explorable ideas where they won't be funded elsewhere, and so there's a really important role for philanthropy to play. From the perspective of J-PAL, the Good Business Lab, I think we think of these as excellent times to think about partnering for evidence generation, because that's where we can generate the data, we can generate the evidence that actually helps you and us together to go to businesses or to go to governments and to try to make the case for taking this out of philanthropy and putting it into their regular practice or into their policy or their legislation, as the case may be. So I think there's a great potential to be partnering there. So in our last few minutes, I want to open it up to questions from the room for our panelists. Yes, and do we have a mic? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for this discussion. My question is most Katrina. I was wondering this open supply hub IDs that you talked about. It's one perspective, you talked about workers using it, but a couple of things I'm thinking about is, are brands using it? Because essentially this is a private market where every brand is trying to build their own rating things. But I think there's a lot of benefit, especially if this can be kind of aggregated in a way where maybe like you can actually build a credit rating index of this, where then you can actually, instead of brands putting their own values, others can put more value on, for example, labor rights in there, and that can actually help the entire ecosystem move better way.
Yeah, no, I think it's really sound thinking on where to go with it. It's hard. Open Supply Hub is a data institution, and they're trying to remain neutral. And so when you put really specific labor rights, violations kind of data into a data set, and you make it public, it's just very sensitive, and brands don't want that seen, and suppliers don't want that seen, but workers do. And so they've taken an approach to try and have it be the most up to date. And so brands use an API. They pay for an API to have their lists of suppliers and want to have all of that updated all the time. There's lots of other, if you go into the system, you can see there's other kinds of information, like how many workers are there, what's the split gender-wise, in addition to like address and whatnot. And they're trying to expand to have more useful information. But it's challenging, like as a data institution, I want to remain neutral, and even just the funding that they take, they try to make sure that they're not being too swayed by brands or nonprofits or whatnot. It's a hard role.
All right, so thanks very much for the question and for sticking with us through the last panel of the afternoon. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.